They played in front of millions. They ran through defenses that no ordinary man could stop. They wore the armor of professional football, the helmets, the shoulder pads, the jerseys with their names stitched on the back. But no armor in the world could protect them from what was waiting for them at home. This is not a story about tackles or touchdowns. This is a story about what happened when the cheering stopped, when the cameras were off, when the men who seemed untouchable were, in fact, the most vulnerable people in the room. These are the stories of NFL players, real men with real families, who were killed by the very people who were supposed to love them most. Their wives, their girlfriends, their partners. Stay with this, because by the end, you won't just know what happened. You'll understand why, and why nobody saw it coming. July 6, 2000. Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of warm summer day that feels ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of day when nothing should go wrong. Fred Lane had just stepped off a flight from Nashville, where he'd been visiting his family for a couple of weeks. He was 24 years old. He was a professional NFL running back. He had a brand new contract, a new team. The Indianapolis Colts had just traded for him 3 months earlier, in a house in Charlotte where his wife and their newborn baby girl were waiting. When police arrived at the scene later that day, they noticed something. The house was still decorated with pink balloons. A stork sign stood in the front yard. The baby, their daughter, was just 7 days old. Fred Lane had come home to what should have been one of the happiest moments of his life. He never made it through the front door. Fred Lane was not supposed to make it to the NFL. He wasn't a first-round pick. He wasn't even drafted. He came out of Lane College, a small historically black university in Jackson, Tennessee, after setting school records that still stand today. Over 3,600 rushing yards in his career. A single-game record of 305 yards against Miles College. But small school players don't get drafted. They get overlooked. So in 1997, the Carolina Panthers signed him as an undrafted free agent. A long shot, a guy with a number, but not a guaranteed roster spot. What happened next surprised everyone, including the Panthers. In his very first NFL season, Fred Lane led the Panthers in rushing attempts, rushing yards, and touchdowns. He ran for 809 yards on 182 carries as a rookie. He started just 7 games, but he played like a man who belonged. By 1999, he had become Carolina's all-time leading rusher. He was 23 years old. He was the kind of player that made fans forget he wasn't supposed to be there. But off the field, things were more complicated. Fred Lane and Deidre Lane had been married for several years by the summer of 2000, and by most accounts, the relationship had become deeply troubled. His father, Fred Lane Sr., would later say that his son and daughter-in-law had been having serious difficulties. The couple had money problems, serious ones. Friends of Fred's told investigators that Deidre had drained the couple's joint bank account. That Fred had been so short on cash that a friend named Bryant Pelps had loaned him money just to get home on multiple occasions. In March of 2000, just 4 months before Fred's death, Deidre had filed a domestic complaint against her husband, claiming he snatched a necklace from around her neck during an argument, causing her to fall. She never pressed charges, but the complaint existed, and police would later point to it as evidence of a marriage that had been unraveling for a long time. By late June and early July of 2000, Fred had been staying at his family home in Nashville, spending time away from Charlotte, away from Deidre. His father would later tell reporters that the 2 weeks Fred spent in Nashville were peaceful, that his son seemed relieved to be home. On July 6th, Fred boarded a flight back to Charlotte. His father said goodbye. He didn't know it would be the last time. Fred arrived at the couple's home on the afternoon of July 6th. He walked up to the front door. He put his key in the lock. 2 shots from a 12-gauge shotgun ended his life before he could turn the handle. The first shot struck him as he stood in the doorway. Then, and this is the detail that the judge would later call decisive, Deidre walked through her husband's blood and fired a second shot into the back of his head while he lay helpless on the floor. When Deidre called 911, she was sobbing. "He just got shot because he wouldn't leave me alone," she told the operator. "I kept telling him to stop." Fred Lane was pronounced dead at 3:15 in the afternoon. His keys were still in the door. The investigation that followed would take years. Deidre's defense team argued she was a battered woman who had acted in self-defense, that years of abuse had driven her to protect herself. But prosecutors painted a very different picture. They argued that Deidre Lane was not a victim. They argued she was calculating, that she had drained the bank accounts, that she had taken out life insurance on her husband, that she had waited patiently for Fred to come home that July afternoon. The judge agreed. In 2003, 3 years after the shooting, Deidre pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. The judge ruled that her actions were intentional and premeditated, that she had fired a second shot into an already helpless man with full deliberation. She was sentenced to 7 years and 11 months in prison. She served nearly 6 years before being released. Fred Lane was 24 years old when he died. His daughter was 7 days old. His name still appears in the Carolina Panthers record books. And somewhere in Jackson, Tennessee, Lane College still has his number retired, a reminder of a young man who beat the odds to make the NFL, only to lose to something no football record could prepare him for. Next, Steve McNair. If Fred Lane was an underdog story, Steve McNair was something else entirely. Steve McNair was a legend. Born in Mount Olive, Mississippi, raised in poverty. His father died when he was 7 years old. His mother worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table. McNair went to Alcorn State, another small, historically black university, where he put up numbers that defied belief. 16,823 passing yards in college, 119 total touchdowns, third in the Heisman Trophy voting in 1994. The Houston Oilers selected him third overall in the 1995 NFL Draft. What followed was one of the most celebrated careers in NFL history. Steve McNair was the kind of quarterback who played through injuries that would sideline lesser men. Broken ribs, torn cartilage, sternum injuries. He absorbed hits like they were minor inconveniences and kept throwing. In 2003, he shared the NFL's Most Valuable Player award. In 2000, he led the Tennessee Titans to Super Bowl 34, a game that came down to a single tackle on the 1-yard line. One of the most dramatic finishes in Super Bowl history. Steve McNair stood for toughness, for resilience, for everything football is supposed to celebrate. And on the morning of July 4th, 2009, he was found dead on a sofa in a Nashville condominium. He had been shot 4 times. To understand what happened to Steve McNair, you have to understand who Sahel Kazemi was and what she believed. Sahel Kazemi was 20 years old. She had immigrated from Iran as a child. By 2009, she was working as a waitress at a Nashville restaurant called Dave & Buster's. That's where she met McNair. McNair was 36. He was married, had been for 12 years. He and his wife, Michelle, had 4 sons together. But by 2008, McNair and Kazemi had begun a relationship. He bought her a Cadillac Escalade for her birthday. He rented a condominium that they shared together. From the outside, it appeared that Kazemi genuinely believed, that McNair was going to leave his wife, that she was going to become Mrs. McNair. But by the summer of 2009, Sahel Kazemi was unraveling. She was behind on payments for 2 cars. Her rent was doubling. She had begun to suspect that McNair, who was already married to another woman, was also seeing a third woman on the side. 2 days before the shooting, police stopped Kazemi behind the wheel of the Escalade McNair had given her. She had bloodshot eyes, alcohol on her breath. The night before the shooting, she told a friend, in words that should have been a warning sign, "My life is a ball of, and I should end it." Nobody called for help. It was Independence Day. While millions of Americans prepared for barbecues and fireworks, Sahel Kazemi walked into the condominium she shared with Steve McNair. He was asleep on the sofa. Nashville Police Chief Ronald Surpass would later explain what the evidence showed. McNair had no defensive wounds. He didn't fight back. He didn't struggle. He never woke up. Kazemi shot him in the head first, then twice in the chest, then again in the head. 4 shots. 4 times. Then she sat down next to his body, reportedly trying to position herself so she would fall into his lap, and shot herself. McNair's friend Wayne Neely discovered the bodies when he arrived at the condo. He was so shocked that he couldn't bring himself to call 911. He called a friend instead, Robert Gaddy, who arrived and made the call. "What he saw in that condo will haunt him for the rest of his life," Gaddy later said. When the news broke, it traveled across the country like a shockwave. Steve McNair, one of the toughest quarterbacks who ever played, had been shot in his sleep. He was 36 years old. Police spent days piecing together what happened. They confirmed that Kazemi had purchased the 9mm semi-automatic pistol just 2 days before the shooting from a man she had met at a party. The purchase was made the same day police pulled her over for drunk driving. The timeline was chilling. The gun was purchased on July 2nd. She was pulled over that same day. McNair was killed on July 4th. Nashville's police chief said Kazemi was spinning out of control in the days before the shooting. That jealousy, financial pressure, and the belief that the man she loved was betraying her had pushed her to a place of no return. McNair's wife, Michelle, had no knowledge of the relationship with Kazemi. She was preparing to speak publicly about her husband, friends said, not about the affair, but about the man she knew. Vigils were held across Nashville. Fans gathered outside LP Field, where McNair had thrown so many touchdowns, where he had carried the Titans on his back through one of the most memorable playoff runs in franchise history. They left jerseys, flowers, letters. A city mourned a man who had given it so much. Steve McNair was laid to rest on July 11th, 2009. He left behind a wife, 4 sons, and a legacy that no single night could ever fully erase. But it also left behind a question that lingered in the minds of everyone who heard the story. How does a man who survived so much on the field, in life, in poverty, in pain, how does he not see it coming? The answer, as it almost always is in these stories, is that love, or what someone believes is love, is the most blinding force on earth. The stories of Fred Lane and Steve McNair are the most documented cases of NFL players killed by romantic partners. But they are not isolated incidents existing in a vacuum. They exist inside a broader, darker landscape, one that involves money, fame, secrecy, toxic relationships, and the particular pressures that come with being a professional athlete. Money, specifically the sudden presence of large amounts of it, changes relationships in ways that are difficult to predict and nearly impossible to reverse. When Fred Lane signed with the Panthers as an undrafted free agent, he went from a small-town kid at a small HBCU to a man with an NFL paycheck almost overnight. When Steve McNair signed his first major NFL deal, he went from Mississippi poverty to multi-million-dollar contracts. If this story moved you, share it. These men deserve to be remembered for more than how they died. And if you want to go deeper on the NFL stories that nobody else is covering, the next video is right there. Subscribe so you never miss one.